The autumn rain hammered against the cracked windows of Riverside Diner like angry fists demanding entry. 17-year-old Marcus Thompson pressed his face closer to the glass, watching droplets race each other down the surface while his empty stomach growled in protest. He'd been sitting in the same corner booth for 3 hours, nursing a single cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. His fingers traced the worn edges of a $5 bill, his last $5 in the entire world. The foster home had kicked him out 2 days after his 18th birthday, just like they always did. "You're an adult now, Marcus," Mrs. Henderson had said with that practiced indifference he'd grown accustomed to. "Time to make your own way." She'd handed him a garbage bag containing his few possessions and wished him luck, as if luck had ever been something Marcus could count on. Now, 3 weeks later, he was down to his final bill. 3 weeks of sleeping in doorways, washing in gas station bathrooms, and applying for jobs that seemed to evaporate the moment employers saw his address, or lack thereof. The diner was warm, though, and the elderly owner, Giuseppe, had a soft heart that had kept Marcus from being thrown out so far. "You gonna order something, kid, or just keep staring at that money like it might multiply?" Giuseppe's weathered face showed concern rather than annoyance. The old Italian immigrant had seen plenty of hard luck cases come through his doors over the 40 years he'd run this place. Marcus looked up, forcing a smile. "Just trying to decide what looks good." Giuseppe's knowing eyes softened. They both understood the real decision Marcus was wrestling with: spend his last $5 on food, or save it for something more essential, though what could be more essential than eating, Marcus couldn't say. The bell above the door chimed, letting in a gust of cold air and an elderly couple who looked like they'd been caught in the worst of the storm. The woman's thin coat dripped steadily onto the worn linoleum floor, and her husband's cane tapped uncertainly as he guided her toward an empty booth near the front. Marcus watched them settle in with the careful movements of people whose bodies had betrayed them long ago. The man, probably in his 70s, helped his wife out of her soaked coat with gentle hands that shook slightly from age or cold. She was tiny, bird-like, with silver hair plastered to her head and eyes that seemed too large for her gaunt face. Giuseppe approached their table with menus and his usual warm smile. "Welcome to Riverside Diner, folks. Terrible night to be out, huh?" "Oh, we don't mind the rain," the woman said, though her chattering teeth suggested otherwise. "We were just hoping to get something warm. It's been a long day." Marcus couldn't help but overhear their quiet conversation as Giuseppe took their order. 2 cups of coffee and a single piece of pie to share. The man's wallet appeared briefly, thin, nearly empty, before disappearing back into his jacket pocket. "Harold, maybe we should just get the coffee," the woman whispered, her voice carrying in the nearly empty diner. "Now, Eleanor, you haven't eaten all day." "We'll make it work," Harold replied, patting her hand with infinite tenderness. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He recognized that particular brand of pride, the kind that made you pretend everything was fine even when you were drowning. He'd perfected that same smile, that same cheerful tone that said, "Don't worry about me," while inside you were calculating whether you could afford to exist for another day. Giuseppe brought their order, and Marcus watched the couple's faces light up at the simple pleasure of something warm. They ate slowly, making every bite count, talking quietly about their day. Eleanor had been to the doctor, nothing serious, just a checkup, but the copay had been more than expected. Harold had spent the afternoon looking for work, though at his age, opportunities were scarce. 73 years old and still trying to prove I'm useful, Marcus heard Harold mutter to his wife. "You're the most useful man I know," Eleanor replied firmly. "This is just a rough patch. We've weathered worse." Marcus thought about his own rough patches, all 17 years of them. Foster home after foster home, each one a new opportunity to be disappointed, to be reminded that he was temporary, expendable. He'd learned early that the world wasn't particularly interested in his survival, that kindness was a luxury most people couldn't afford. But watching Harold and Eleanor, seeing the way they cared for each other despite their obvious struggles, something stirred in Marcus that he'd thought had died long ago. Hope, maybe. Or just the stubborn refusal to let the world win completely. Giuseppe appeared at their table with the check, and Marcus saw Harold's face go pale as he opened his wallet again. The old man counted slowly, once, twice, a third time, before his shoulders sagged slightly. "I'm so sorry," Harold said quietly to Giuseppe. "I thought I had enough, but..." He spread the bills on the table, $4 and some change. The check was for $7.50. Eleanor's face flushed with embarrassment. "We can come back tomorrow, pay the difference." "Hey, don't worry about it," Giuseppe said quickly, his accent thickening with emotion. "You folks just stay warm, okay? We'll figure it out." But Marcus was already standing up, his legs moving before his brain could talk him out of it. The $5 bill felt warm in his sweaty palm as he approached their table. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I couldn't help but overhear. Please, let me cover this." He placed the $5 bill on the table, aware that every eye in the small diner was now focused on him. Harold and Eleanor looked up in shock, taking in Marcus's worn clothes, his too thin frame, the obvious signs that he wasn't exactly rolling in money himself. "Oh, son, we couldn't possibly," Eleanor began. "Please," Marcus interrupted gently. "It would mean a lot to me if you'd let me do this." Harold studied Marcus's face for a long moment, and something passed between them, an understanding between two people who knew what it meant to be forgotten by the world. "That's very kind of you," Harold said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But are you sure? You look like maybe you could use it yourself." Marcus smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt completely genuine. "I'm sure. Sometimes we all need a little help, right?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand. Her skin was papery thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "What's your name, dear?" "Marcus. Marcus Thompson." "Well, Marcus Thompson, you've just restored my faith in young people," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a paper napkin. "Harold and I, well, we've been having a difficult time lately. This kindness means more than you know." Giuseppe, who had been watching the exchange with growing emotion, shook his head in wonder. "Kid, in all my years running this place, I've never seen anything like that. You just gave away your last dollar, didn't you?" Marcus shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "It's just money. They needed it more than I did." But even as he said it, Marcus felt the weight of what he'd done settling in. That $5 had been his safety net, his buffer against complete destitution. Now he had nothing, not even enough for a cup of coffee tomorrow morning. Harold carefully tucked the $5 bill under the check and added his own money, leaving a generous tip for Giuseppe. "Marcus, would you please sit with us for a few minutes? I'd like to hear your story, if you don't mind sharing." Something about Harold's gentle tone, so different from the social workers and case managers who had demanded his story over the years, made Marcus feel safe. He slid into the booth across from them, and found himself talking, really talking, for the first time in months. He told them about aging out of foster care, about the jobs that never materialized, about sleeping in the park and pretending everything was fine. He talked about the dreams he'd had to abandon, college, a career in engineering, a normal life, and the smaller dreams that kept him going from day to day. Eleanor listened with the intensity of someone who understood that everyone's story mattered, while Harold nodded at all the right moments, his eyes never showing the pity that Marcus had learned to hate. Instead, there was respect there, acknowledgement of Marcus's strength in simply surviving. "You remind me of myself at your age," Harold said when Marcus finished. "I came to this country with nothing but hope and stubborn determination. Times were different then, but hopelessness, that's always been the same." "What did you do?" Marcus asked. "How did you make it work?" Harold smiled sadly. "I kept believing that tomorrow might be different than today. Some days, that was harder than others. But I had Eleanor to keep me honest, to remind me that giving up wasn't an option." Eleanor squeezed her husband's hand. "We've always believed that kindness comes back to you, sometimes in ways you never expect. What you did tonight, Marcus, that kindness is going to find its way back to you. I'm certain of it." Marcus wanted to believe her, but experience had taught him that the universe wasn't particularly invested in fairness. Good people suffered while cruel ones prospered, and kindness was more often punished than rewarded. Still, looking at this couple who had somehow maintained their faith despite their own struggles, he felt something crack open in his chest, a tiny seed of possibility. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from Harold's immigration story to Eleanor's career as a school teacher, from Marcus's dreams of engineering to their shared love of old movies. Giuseppe refilled their coffee cups without charge, seeming to understand that something important was happening in his little diner. Finally, the storm began to subside, and Harold checked his watch. "We should probably head home. Eleanor tires easily these days." They stood slowly, Harold helping Eleanor back into her damp coat. She turned to Marcus one more time, placing both hands on his shoulders. "Marcus Thompson, you remember what I told you about kindness finding its way back? And in the meantime, you remember that there are people in this world who believe in you, even if we just met tonight." She pressed something into his hand, a small piece of paper with their names and address written in careful cursive. "If you ever need anything at all, you come find us. Promise me." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I promise." Harold shook his hand firmly. "Take care of yourself, son. And don't give up on those dreams. The world needs engineers, especially ones who understand what it means to struggle." Marcus watched them leave, Harold's cane tapping against the wet pavement as they disappeared into the night. He looked down at the paper in his hand, at their address written in Eleanor's careful script, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that he wasn't completely alone in the world. Giuseppe appeared beside him, holding a steaming plate of food. "On the house, kid. Can't have my customers starving in my establishment." "Giuseppe, I can't." "You can and you will. What you did tonight, that took guts. And heart. Don't see much of either these days." The old man's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "My father always told me that the measure of a man isn't how much he has, but what he's willing to give when he has nothing. You just proved you're a good man, Marcus Thompson." Marcus ate slowly, savoring every bite not just because he was hungry, but because it tasted like hope. Like possibility. Like maybe Eleanor was right about kindness finding its way back. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. Marcus had nowhere to go, no money for a hotel room, no prospects for tomorrow. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel afraid. He had given away his last $5 to strangers, and somehow, he felt richer than he had in years. As he prepared to leave the warm sanctuary of the diner, Marcus had no way of knowing that his act of kindness had been witnessed by more than just Giuseppe and the other late-night customers. He couldn't know that someone had been watching, taking note, making plans. He couldn't know that tomorrow would bring a knock on the door that would change everything. But tonight, it was enough to know that kindness existed, that love could survive even the hardest circumstances, and that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to let the world make you cruel. Marcus stepped out into the cool night air, Eleanor's address safely tucked in his pocket, and walked toward whatever tomorrow might bring. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 2. 24 hours earlier, while Marcus was still sleeping in Riverside Park and dreaming of warm meals, Victoria Ashford was sitting in the back booth of Riverside Diner, invisible behind a laptop screen and a carefully cultivated appearance of ordinariness. At 62, Victoria had perfected the art of blending in. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes were department store casual, and her Honda Civic was the kind of car that disappeared in traffic. No one would guess that she was worth $800 million, or that she was the CEO of Ashford Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies on the East Coast. But Victoria hadn't always been wealthy. She remembered, with crystal clarity, what it felt like to count pennies, to choose between rent and groceries, to smile politely while your stomach cramped from hunger. Those memories were exactly why she found herself in places like Riverside Diner on rainy Tuesday nights, working on her laptop and watching. Always watching. Victoria had built her fortune on understanding people, their motivations, their fears, their capacity for both cruelty and compassion. As a young woman, she'd clawed her way up from poverty through a combination of brilliant business instincts and an uncanny ability to see potential where others saw only problems. But success had cost her dearly. 2 failed marriages, an estranged son, and a chronic loneliness that no amount of money could fill. 5 years ago, after a particularly brutal board meeting where she'd been forced to lay off 300 workers to increase quarterly profits, Victoria had experienced what her therapist politely called a crisis of purpose. She'd looked in the mirror that night and seen a stranger, someone whose heart had calcified along with her bank account. That's when she'd started her nocturnal wanderings. Diners, bus stations, emergency rooms, homeless shelters, places where people's true natures revealed themselves when they thought no one important was watching. She'd witnessed casual cruelties that made her lose faith in humanity, but also small acts of heroism that reminded her why humanity was worth saving. Tonight had started like any other. She'd finished her board reports, made notes about the upcoming quarterly review, and was preparing to leave when the elderly couple stumbled in from the rain. Victoria had immediately recognized the signs: the careful way they counted their money, the quiet conversation about what they could afford, the practiced dignity of people who refused to admit they were drowning. She'd been reaching for her purse, ready to anonymously cover their bill, when the young man in the corner booth stood up. Victoria watched with growing amazement as Marcus approached Harold and Eleanor's table. She studied his face, looking for the telltale signs of performance, the slight smirk that suggested he knew he was being watched, the calculating look of someone expecting recognition or reward. She'd seen plenty of performative charity over the years, gestures designed to impress rather than help. But Marcus's face showed none of that. Instead, she saw genuine concern, the kind of empathy that comes from understanding suffering firsthand. When he placed that $5 bill on the table, Victoria noticed the slight tremor in his hand, not from nerves, but from the magnitude of what he was giving up. She'd been in business long enough to recognize a person's net worth from their clothes, their posture, their unconscious habits. Marcus was broke. Not temporarily embarrassed, not waiting for a paycheck, genuinely, completely broke. That $5 wasn't spare change, it was everything he had. And he'd given it away without a moment's hesitation. Victoria closed her laptop and leaned forward, studying the interaction with the intensity she usually reserved for merger negotiations. She watched Harold's dignified acceptance, Eleanor's tears of gratitude, Giuseppe's obvious emotion. She listened to their conversation, her business-trained ear picking up details that painted a picture of 3 people who understood struggle in ways her current circle of wealthy acquaintances never could. When Marcus shared his story, aging out of foster care, sleeping in parks, the endless cycle of rejection and disappointment, Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. She'd been that young once, desperate and alone, though her circumstances had been different. She'd been lucky enough to catch a break, to meet someone who'd seen her potential and given her a chance. Marcus deserved that same chance. But Victoria had learned, through years of disappointment, that good intentions were worthless without proper execution. She'd thrown money at problems before, only to watch it disappear into the void of poor planning and unrealistic expectations. If she was going to help Marcus, and watching him, she knew she needed to do it right. She waited until the couple left, then watched Marcus eat Giuseppe's donated meal with the careful attention of someone who didn't know when food might come again. When he finally left the diner, walking into the night with nowhere to go, Victoria made a decision that would change both their lives. But first, she had research to do. Victoria drove straight to her downtown office, using her security clearance to enter the building at nearly midnight. Her corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive art, felt sterile after the warmth of the diner. She settled behind her mahogany desk and opened a secure laptop, accessing databases that most people didn't know existed. Marcus Thompson. Born 17 years ago to Jennifer Thompson, a 16-year-old girl who died of an overdose when Marcus was 2. Father unknown. The foster system had swallowed him up, shuffling him between homes like an unwanted package. 15 different placements in 15 years, each one documented in clinical language that couldn't begin to capture the reality of a child who'd never had a place to call home. But it was Marcus's school records that made Victoria sit up straighter. Despite the chaos of his home life, his grades were exceptional. Math, science, engineering. He'd excelled in everything, even when he'd had to change schools mid-semester, even when he'd had to work part-time jobs to help his foster families make ends meet. His guidance counselor at Roosevelt High had written, "Marcus Thompson is one of the most naturally gifted students I've encountered in 20 years of education. With proper support and opportunities, he could succeed at any university in the country. Unfortunately, his current circumstances make higher education unlikely." The report was dated 6 months ago. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her mind already working through possibilities. She'd built her fortune by recognizing potential before others did, by investing in people and ideas that others overlooked. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a worthy charity case, he was a diamond in the rough, exactly the kind of investment that had made her wealthy in the first place. But this couldn't be about business. If she approached Marcus as Victoria Ashford, CEO, offering him some corporate scholarship program, she'd rob him of his dignity and herself of the chance to truly make a difference. This needed to be personal, human, real. She spent the next 6 hours crafting a plan. Victoria owned property throughout the city, including a small apartment building in Marcus's neighborhood that she'd purchased as an investment years ago. The building's manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a woman Victoria trusted implicitly, honest, discreet, and possessed of the same kind of practical compassion that had drawn Victoria to the diner in the first place. Next, she called her head of human resources, a man who'd worked for her for 15 years and who'd learned not to ask too many questions about Victoria's occasional unusual requests. "David, I need you to create a position. Entry level, but with real growth potential. Manufacturing trainee with a focus on engineering applications. What qualifications are you looking for?" Victoria smiled, thinking of Marcus's transcript. Intelligence, integrity, and the ability to learn quickly. Someone who's had to overcome obstacles. Someone who understands that nothing in life is guaranteed. "How soon do you need this person to start?" "Tomorrow, if possible." "And David?" "This one's important to me. Make sure they have everything they need to succeed." By sunrise, Victoria had arranged for an apartment, available immediately, security deposit waived due to a clerical error, a job offer, addressed to Marcus personally, delivered by courier, and a scholarship fund, anonymous, renewable, sufficient to cover 4 years at any state university. But the most important part of her plan couldn't be arranged through phone calls and database searches. Victoria needed to see Marcus again, to look him in the eye and confirm what she'd suspected the night before, that his kindness hadn't been performance, that his character was as genuine as it had appeared. She drove back to Riverside Park, where her research had indicated Marcus had been sleeping. The morning was crisp and clear, the rain having washed the air clean. She found him sitting on a bench near the pond, writing in a small notebook with a pencil stub, his few possessions in a backpack beside him. Victoria approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Thompson?" Marcus looked up, his expression wary but not hostile. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Victoria. I was at the diner last night." She'd practiced this introduction, stripping away every trace of her corporate persona. "I saw what you did for that elderly couple." Marcus's cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh. That wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a big deal." "It was to them," Victoria said simply. "And it was to me. I've been thinking about you all night, wondering about your story." She sat down on the bench beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but where are you staying? You look like you've had a rough few weeks." Marcus hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty was easier than pretense. "Nowhere, really. I aged out of foster care last month. Still looking for work, still figuring things out." Victoria nodded as if this information didn't break her heart completely. "That must be incredibly difficult. You're very young to be facing all of this alone." "I'm managing," Marcus said, and Victoria heard the pride in his voice, the same pride that had kept Harold from accepting charity he desperately needed. "I'm sure you are. You seem like a remarkably capable young man." Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully. "I wonder if you'd be willing to have coffee with me?" I have a proposition that might interest you. Marcus's wariness increased. What kind of proposition? Victoria smiled, remembering her own suspicion at that age, the hard-earned knowledge that adults rarely offered something for nothing. Nothing strange, I promise. I work in manufacturing, and I'm always looking for bright young people who might be interested in the field. Last night, you showed me more about your character in 5 minutes than most people reveal in 5 years. I'd like to talk to you about some opportunities. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, and Victoria submitted to his scrutiny without flinching. She could see him weighing options, calculating risks, trying to decide if she was genuine or if this was some kind of trap. Finally, he nodded. Okay. Coffee sounds good. They walked back to Riverside Diner, where Giuseppe greeted Marcus like an old friend and Victoria like a welcome stranger. She ordered breakfast for both of them, ignoring Marcus's protests that he wasn't hungry. Eat, she said firmly. You can't make good decisions on an empty stomach. Over eggs and toast, Victoria told Marcus about Ashford Industries, though she was careful not to reveal her role as CEO. She presented herself as a senior manager, someone with influence but not ultimate authority. She talked about the company's apprenticeship programs, about opportunities for advancement, about tuition assistance for employees who showed promise. Why me? Marcus asked finally. You don't know anything about me. Victoria set down her coffee cup and looked him directly in the eye. I know that you gave your last $5 to strangers who needed it. I know that you've survived 17 years in a system that failed you, and you did it without becoming bitter or cruel. I know that you're sitting here having breakfast with someone you just met because you're brave enough to take chances when they're offered to you. She leaned forward slightly. Marcus, I've been in business for 40 years. I've hired thousands of people, and I can usually tell within minutes whether someone has what it takes to succeed. You have something special, not just intelligence, though that's obvious, but character. Integrity. The kind of person I want representing my company. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring down at his plate. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. This feels too good to be true, he said quietly. I understand that feeling, Victoria replied. When good things happen after a long string of bad things, it's natural to be suspicious. But sometimes, Marcus, good things happen simply because they should. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is a formal job offer. Entry-level position, but with real potential for growth. The salary is enough to live on, modestly, but comfortably. There's health insurance, retirement benefits, and educational assistance if you decide to pursue a degree. Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands, staring at it as if it might disappear. There's also this, Victoria said, handing him a second envelope. Information about an apartment that just became available. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. The landlord is willing to waive the security deposit for the right tenant. Marcus opened the first envelope, his eyes widening as he read the job offer. The salary was more than he'd dared hope for, enough not just to survive, but to actually live. I don't understand, he said finally. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Victoria smiled, thinking of her younger self, desperate and alone in a world that seemed designed to crush dreams. Because someone did something similar for me once, a long time ago. And because last night, you reminded me that there are still people in this world worth investing in. She stood up, leaving money on the table for their breakfast. The job starts Monday, if you're interested. Take the weekend to think about it, to get settled. And Marcus? He looked up at her, his face a mixture of hope and disbelief. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've built the life you deserve. Victoria left him sitting in the diner, staring at the envelopes that held his future. She drove back to her office with a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. She had no way of knowing that her carefully laid plans were about to intersect with forces beyond her control, or that her investment in Marcus Thompson would yield returns she'd never anticipated. But for now, it was enough to know that she'd kept faith with the young woman she'd once been, and with the belief that had sustained her through her own darkest days, that sometimes, if you're very lucky, kindness really does come back to you. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 3. Marcus stood in the doorway of his new apartment, still not quite believing it was real. The morning sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating hardwood floors that didn't creak under his feet and walls that belonged to him, well, at least for the next year according to his lease. It had been 4 days since Victoria had handed him those envelopes, 4 days since his life had transformed from a desperate existence into something that resembled an actual future. The apartment was small but perfect, a studio with a Murphy bed, a kitchenette, and most importantly, a lock that kept the world out and his few possessions safe. His first day at Ashford Industries had exceeded every expectation. The facility was massive, a testament to American manufacturing at its finest, with gleaming equipment and workers who took obvious pride in their craft. His supervisor, David Martinez, had welcomed him with the kind of respect Marcus had never experienced from an adult authority figure. "Victoria spoke very highly of you," David had said, leading Marcus through the orientation process. "She has an eye for talent, and she's never wrong about people. You're going to do well here." Marcus had thrown himself into the work with the intensity of someone who understood how quickly good things could disappear. The other trainees were older, most of them fresh out of community college programs, but Marcus's quick grasp of concepts and his willingness to ask questions had earned their respect and David's notice. "Thompson," David had called out yesterday afternoon, "you're catching on faster than anyone I've seen. Keep this up, and we'll have you in the advanced training program within 6 months." Advanced training meant better pay, specialized skills, and a clear path toward the kind of stable career Marcus had never dared imagine. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was building something. But success, Marcus was learning, came with its own kind of anxiety. Every morning, he woke up expecting the phone call that would inform him it had all been a mistake, that Victoria had changed her mind, that the universe was ready to return him to his regularly scheduled powerlessness. This morning was different, though. Today was Saturday, his first real weekend off in longer than he could remember, and he'd made plans. He wanted to visit Harold and Eleanor, to thank them properly for the inspiration they'd unknowingly provided, and to share the good news about how their kindness had led to his transformation. Marcus had walked by their address twice during the week, gathering courage for a proper visit. The small house was in a neighborhood that had seen better days, but it was neat and well-maintained, with a tiny garden that spoke of Eleanor's careful attention. Now, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and a box of Giuseppe's cannoli as gifts, Marcus knocked on their front door. The sound echoed hollowly, and something in that echo made his chest tighten with unease. He knocked again, waited, then tried once more. Nothing. "They're not there, honey." The voice came from the neighboring porch, where an elderly black woman was watering plants with the careful attention of someone who understood that life was precious and fragile. "Excuse me?" Marcus approached the fence separating the properties. "Harold and Eleanor. They haven't been home since Wednesday morning. That's when the ambulance came." The woman's face was kind but worried. "I'm Mrs. Washington. I've been looking after them, informally, you understand. Harold's been having some health issues lately." Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "Ambulance? What happened?" Harold collapsed in the garden. Eleanor was beside herself, poor thing. The paramedic said something about his heart. Mrs. Washington set down her watering can and came closer to the fence. "Are you family? A friend?" Eleanor mentioned a young man who'd been kind to them recently. "That's me. Marcus Thompson. We met at a diner earlier this week." Marcus struggled to process the information. "Do you know which hospital they went to?" "City General, I believe. But honey, you might want to call first. Eleanor's been staying there around the clock, and visiting hours are strict." Marcus thanked Mrs. Washington and practically ran back to his apartment, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. Harold and Eleanor had become more than just the couple he'd helped, they'd become symbols of the goodness that still existed in the world, proof that kindness wasn't naive but necessary. He called City General and navigated the hospital's phone system until he reached someone who could confirm that Harold Ashford was indeed a patient in the cardiac unit. The name stopped Marcus cold. Ashford. The same as Victoria's company, the same as his boss who'd changed his life. Coincidences like that didn't exist. In Marcus's experience, when seemingly unrelated pieces of his life suddenly connected, it usually meant complications he hadn't seen coming. Meanwhile, across town in her corner office, Victoria Ashford was discovering that wealth and power meant nothing when confronted with the ghosts of your own choices. The private investigator's report lay open on her desk, though she'd memorized every word hours ago. Harold James Ashford, age 73. Eleanor Marie Ashford, age 71. Her father and mother, living 12 miles from her downtown headquarters in a house that cost less than what Victoria spent on shoes in a month. The photographs were what broke her heart, Harold tending a small garden with the same careful attention he'd once given to his own manufacturing business, Eleanor hanging laundry on a line because they couldn't afford to repair their dryer. Her parents, the people who'd raised her to believe that hard work and integrity were the only currency that mattered, were living in genteel poverty while their daughter commanded boardrooms and owned more property than she could accurately count. Victoria's hands shook as she reached for her phone, then set it down again without dialing. She'd picked up that phone dozens of times over the past 30 years, always stopping before completing the call that would bridge 3 decades of silence and pride. The estrangement hadn't started with cruelty or betrayal, which might have been easier to overcome. It had started with success, Victoria's success, built partly on the ruins of her father's dreams. Harold Ashford had owned a small but prosperous manufacturing company, the kind of family business that had been the backbone of American industry for generations. When Victoria graduated from business school with an MBA and more ambition than sense, Harold had welcomed her into the company as his heir apparent. But Victoria had seen inefficiencies where Harold saw tradition, opportunities where he saw obligations to longtime employees, profit margins where he saw loyalty to community. Their philosophical differences had escalated into personal conflicts, and finally into the kind of bitter argument that can destroy families with words that can never be taken back. Victoria had left her father's company and started her own, using connections and knowledge gained at Harold's side to compete directly with him. She'd told herself it was business, not personal, but business had a way of becoming devastatingly personal when family was involved. Within 5 years, Victoria's aggressive expansion and cost-cutting had driven her father's company out of several key markets. Harold, too proud to ask for help and too principled to adopt Victoria's ruthless tactics, had been forced to sell the business he'd spent 40 years building. The buyer had been a holding company that Victoria secretly controlled. The final insult hadn't been the money. Victoria had paid a fair price, even a generous one. It had been the letter Harold received afterward, informing him that the factory would be closed and the jobs moved overseas. 60 loyal employees, some who'd worked for the Ashford family for decades, lost their livelihoods in pursuit of quarterly profit margins. Harold had called Victoria exactly once after that, his voice cold with a disappointment that cut deeper than anger could have. "I raised you to be better than this," he'd said. "I taught you that success without honor is just expensive failure. But you've chosen money over family, profit over principle. I don't know who you've become, Victoria, but she's not my daughter." He'd hung up before she could respond, could explain, could justify decisions that had seemed reasonable in board meetings but felt monstrous in the silence of her empty house. That had been 30 years ago. Victoria had tried to reach out several times in the early years, flowers on Eleanor's birthday, Christmas cards that were returned unopened, checks that were torn up and mailed back. Eventually, she'd stopped trying, telling herself that pride ran both ways in the Ashford family. But she'd never stopped watching. The private investigators she'd hired over the years had provided regular reports on her parents' lives, Harold's struggles to find work after age 45, Eleanor's quiet dignity as she'd taken cleaning jobs to supplement their income, their gradual slide from middle-class comfort to the careful economy of people who counted every dollar. Victoria had anonymously paid Harold's medical bills when he'd had his first heart attack 5 years ago. She'd arranged for grocery deliveries when Eleanor broke her hip. She'd even bought the house they lived in through a shell company and kept the rent artificially low, telling herself these gestures were penance for sins that couldn't be forgiven through money alone. Now, staring at the investigators' latest photographs, Victoria realized that her parents were the elderly couple Marcus had helped at the diner. The young man she'd chosen to mentor, the person whose character had impressed her so deeply, had shown more compassion to her own parents in 5 minutes than she'd been able to demonstrate in 30 years. The irony was devastating and perfect. Marcus had bridged the gap between Victoria and her parents without knowing any of them were connected. His kindness had touched 3 generations of Ashfords, each carrying their own burden of pride and regret. Victoria's phone rang, startling her from her reverie. The caller ID showed City General Hospital, and she answered with the immediate fear of someone who'd been expecting bad news for decades. "Miss Ashford? This is Dr. Patel from the cardiac unit at City General. Your father has been admitted with a heart attack, and your mother asked us to call you." Victoria's carefully controlled world tilted sideways. Eleanor had asked for her. After 30 years of silence, her mother had asked for her. "How is he?" Victoria's voice came out as a whisper. "Stable, but serious. We've performed an angioplasty, but at his age, recovery will be slow. Your mother has been here since Wednesday. I think she could use the support." Victoria was already reaching for her keys. "I'm on my way." She drove to the hospital in a daze, her mind cycling through 30 years of imagined conversations, practiced apologies, and feared rejections. The cardiac unit smelled like antiseptic and anxiety, filled with the particular quiet of people waiting for news that could change everything. Eleanor was in the family waiting area, looking smaller than Victoria remembered, her silver hair mussed and her clothes wrinkled from sleeping in uncomfortable chairs. She looked up when Victoria approached, and for a moment, time collapsed entirely. Victoria was 8 years old again, running to her mother for comfort after a nightmare. "Victoria." Eleanor's voice held no anger, just exhaustion and relief. "You came." "Of course I came." Victoria sat down beside her mother, noting the tremor in Eleanor's hands, the way she seemed to have aged a decade in the past few days. "How is he?" "Stubborn as ever. The doctor says he needs surgery, but Harold's refusing until he can figure out how we'll pay for it." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. 40 years of marriage, and I still can't make him understand that pride is a luxury we can't afford." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. "Mom, the money isn't. I know who you are, sweetheart. I know what you've built, what you've accomplished. Your father and we've followed your career in the newspapers, on the internet. We've been proud of you, even when we were too proud to say so." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "You've been proud of me? After what I did to Dad's company, after..." Eleanor reached over and took Victoria's hand, her fingers warm despite their fragility. "What you did was business. Ruthless, perhaps, but business. What we did was let business become personal, let pride keep us from our daughter for 30 years. That was our mistake, Victoria, not yours." Victoria stared at their joined hands, seeing her father's long fingers and her mother's gentle strength in her own features. "I never meant to hurt him. I never meant to hurt either of you. I know. And deep down, Harold knows too. But men of his generation, they tie their worth to their work in ways that can be destructive. When you succeeded where he failed, it felt like judgment rather than achievement." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of 3 decades settling between them like a bridge finally strong enough to cross. "There's something else," Eleanor said finally. "That young man who helped us at the diner, Marcus Thompson. He's been calling the hospital, asking about Harold. He seems to think he's responsible somehow, wants to help with expenses." Victoria's heart clenched. Marcus, with his generous spirit and empty pockets, was trying to take care of her parents while she, with all her resources, had been paralyzed by pride and fear. "He's a good person," Victoria said carefully. Eleanor smiled for the first time since Victoria had arrived. "He is. He reminds me of someone I used to know, a young woman who thought she could save the world through sheer determination. What happened to her? She grew up. Made mistakes. Built an empire." Eleanor squeezed Victoria's hand. "But I think, maybe, she's still in there somewhere. Still trying to save the world, just with different tools." Before Victoria could respond, Marcus Thompson rounded the corner, carrying flowers and wearing an expression of such genuine concern that Victoria felt her throat tighten. He stopped short when he saw her, confusion flickering across his features. "Victoria? What are you? How did you know about Harold?" Eleanor looked between them with growing understanding. "You two know each other?" Victoria met Marcus's eyes and saw the exact moment when he began to piece together the connections, the shared last name, Victoria's presence at the hospital, the unlikely coincidences that had brought them all together. "Yes," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "We know each other. And I think it's time I told you both a story about family, and pride, and the unexpected ways love can find its way home." If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 4. The cardiac unit's family conference room felt smaller with 3 people and 30 years of complicated history crowded into it. Marcus sat across from Victoria and Eleanor, his flowers wilting forgotten on the table between them, trying to process revelations that made his own difficult life seem simple by comparison. "So you're telling me," Marcus said slowly, his engineer's mind working to align all the variables, "that Harold and Eleanor, the couple I helped at the diner, are your parents. And you're Victoria Ashford, CEO of the company where I work. And nobody knew about any of these connections until right now." Victoria nodded, looking smaller than she had in her office, more human. The careful professional mask she'd worn during their coffee meeting had crumbled completely, revealing a woman wrestling with decades of regret and fear. "The universe has a twisted sense of humor," she said quietly. "I spent 30 years being too proud to make the first move toward reconciliation, and it took a stranger's kindness to bring us all together." Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over Marcus's. "Not a stranger, dear. Family. Because that's what you've become to us, in the way that matters most." Marcus felt the familiar twist of emotion that came whenever someone offered him belonging. He'd learned not to trust it completely. Too many temporary families had promised permanence before teaching him that love was conditional, that safety was temporary. But something about Eleanor's touch, about the way Victoria looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, made him want to believe. "How is Harold?" Marcus asked, redirecting the conversation away from feelings he wasn't ready to examine. "What did the doctors say?" Eleanor's composure wavered slightly. "The heart attack was significant. He needs surgery, a triple bypass, but he's refusing treatment until we can prove we can pay for it. Harold's never taken charity in his life, and he's not about to start now." Marcus did quick math in his head. Heart surgery, hospital stays, rehabilitation, the costs would be astronomical. His own first paycheck, which had felt like wealth a week ago, wouldn't cover a fraction of the expenses. But Harold and Eleanor had given him something more valuable than money. They'd restored his faith that goodness existed in the world. He owed them everything. "How much?" Marcus asked. Victoria and Eleanor both stared at him. "Marcus," Victoria said gently, "the surgery alone will cost more than $50,000, and that's before recovery costs, medications, follow-up care." "How much total?" Marcus interrupted. "What's the number that makes Harold agree to the surgery?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, we can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Marcus's voice carried the same quiet determination that had moved him to pay for their dinner. "Harold and Eleanor changed my life. Not just because of what happened after, though that matters too, but because they reminded me that love still exists, that people can stay good even when the world gives them every reason not to be." He stood up, pacing to the small window that looked out over the city. "I've been poor my entire life. I know what it feels like to choose between medicine and food, between pride and survival. Harold's making the same choice I've made 100 times, except now I'm in a position to do something about it." Victoria watched him with an expression that reminded Marcus of the way she'd looked at him in the diner, like she was seeing something that surprised and impressed her. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I admire what you're trying to do, but the reality is that I have a job now, a steady paycheck, and the ability to take out loans. The reality is that sometimes you have to choose between being practical and being right, and helping Harold is right." Marcus turned back to face them both. I'm not Harold. I don't have a lifetime of pride to maintain or dignity to protect. I've been charity case, a foster kid, a homeless teenager. Taking on debt to help people I care about isn't humiliation, it's honor. Eleanor was crying openly now, and Victoria's carefully controlled expression was cracking around the edges. There's more, Victoria said quietly. Things about my relationship with my parents, about why they're struggling financially, that you need to understand. She told him about the business rivalry, about the company she destroyed in pursuit of success, about 30 years of estrangement built on pride and principle and the inability to say, I'm sorry, when it might have mattered. Marcus listened without judgment, recognizing the familiar patterns of family damage, the way good people could hurt each other through the best intentions gone wrong. So you see, Victoria finished, this is my fault. My responsibility. Harold is in that hospital bed partly because of choices I made 30 years ago, and I can't let you sacrifice your future to fix my mistakes. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd learned. The family dynamics were complex, layered with decades of hurt and misunderstanding, but the core truth was simple: people he cared about were in pain, and he had the power to help. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, he said finally. What matters is what we do now. He sat back down, leaning forward with the intensity he'd learned to bring to engineering problems. Here's what I propose: we pool our resources. Victoria, you cover the surgery and immediate medical costs. I'll handle the recovery expenses, medications, whatever insurance doesn't cover. Eleanor, you let us do this without arguing, because fighting us takes energy you need to spend on taking care of Harold. Victoria stared at him. Marcus, you can't possibly afford. I can't afford not to. Marcus's voice was firm. These people gave me hope when I had nothing. They showed me that kindness wasn't extinct, that love could survive anything. You gave me a job and a future when I was ready to give up completely. This isn't charity, it's investment. I'm investing in the people who invested in me. Eleanor reached across the table and took both of their hands. You know what Harold's going to say when he finds out about this plan? Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances. He's going to say that his stubborn pride nearly cost him the chance to watch his daughter come home and his honorary grandson become family. Eleanor's voice was steady now, filled with the quiet authority that came from 71 years of navigating life's complications. And then he's going to cry, because that's what Harold does when he's overwhelmed by gratitude he doesn't know how to express. Victoria laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and grief. I'd forgotten that about him. The crying. He cried when you graduated valedictorian from high school. He cried when you got accepted to business school. He cried when you started your first company, even though he was angry about the circumstances. Eleanor smiled through her own tears. Harold Ashford has spent 73 years pretending he's tougher than he is, but he's never fooled me for a minute. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that he'd never experienced before. This was what family was supposed to feel like, messy and complicated and absolutely essential. There's one more thing, he said. When Harold wakes up, when he's ready to hear it, I want you both to tell him something for me. Victoria and Eleanor waited. Tell him that Marcus Thompson, former foster kid and current Ashford Industries employee, considers it the highest honor of his life to be trusted with his family's well-being. Tell him that some debts can't be measured in money, and that taking care of people you love isn't charity, it's privilege. Victoria was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. How are you real? She asked quietly. How does someone survive what you've survived and still believe in goodness like this? Marcus thought about the question seriously. I think maybe because I've seen what happens when people give up on goodness. I've lived in that world, and I don't want to be part of making it bigger. Harold and Eleanor showed me that another world is possible, one where people take care of each other not because they have to, but because they choose to. He stood up again, suddenly energized by purpose. I'm going to go talk to the financial office, see what kind of payment plans they offer, what paperwork we need to get the surgery scheduled. Marcus, wait. Victoria rose as well. Let me call my assistant, have her handle the administrative details. You don't need to. Yes, I do. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. This isn't about efficiency or who has better connections. It's about me taking responsibility for people I care about. Let me do this part myself. Victoria nodded slowly, understanding flickering in her eyes. All right. But I'm coming with you. We'll handle the paperwork together. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Eleanor called after them. Victoria? Marcus? They turned back. Thank you. Both of you. For giving an old woman her family back. 2 hours later, the administrative gauntlet had been navigated, insurance forms completed, and surgical schedules coordinated. Harold's surgery was scheduled for the following morning, with payment arrangements that satisfied both the hospital's requirements and everyone's need to contribute meaningfully. Marcus had insisted on putting his name on loan documents, even though Victoria's financial guarantees made his contribution largely symbolic. But symbols mattered, especially to men like Harold who measured their worth by their ability to stand independently. He's going to want to pay you back, Victoria warned as they walked back toward the cardiac unit. Every penny, with interest. I'm counting on it, Marcus replied. Not because I need the money, but because paying it back will let him keep his dignity while accepting help. Victoria stopped walking, studying Marcus with that same intense focus she'd shown in the diner. You understand him. How is that possible? You barely know him. Marcus was quiet for a moment, trying to articulate something he'd never put into words before. I understand what it's like to be proud of who you are even when the world treats you like you don't matter. Harold built something with his hands and his integrity, and losing it felt like losing himself. I know that feeling. He looked at Victoria directly. The difference is, Harold had 40 years of success before he faced failure. He had a wife who loved him, a daughter who achieved everything he taught her to value, even if she did it in ways he couldn't approve of. He had a foundation. I've been building mine from nothing, so maybe I can see possibilities he can't. Victoria's expression softened. What possibilities? That success isn't just about what you build, it's about what you rebuild when everything falls apart. That dignity isn't something other people can take away from you, it's something you choose to keep. That family isn't just about sharing blood, it's about sharing belief in each other. They had reached the cardiac unit, where Eleanor was visible through the glass doors, sitting beside Harold's bed and holding his hand while he slept. Look at them, Marcus said quietly. 50 years of marriage, and she's still choosing to believe in him. That's not just love, that's faith. Harold's lucky to have someone who sees him as more than his worst moments. Victoria followed his gaze, watching her parents together for the first time in 3 decades. I used to see them like that, she admitted. Before I got so focused on building my own empire that I forgot theirs mattered too. It's not too late, Marcus said. Empires can be rebuilt. Relationships can be repaired. But only if everyone's willing to start from where they are instead of where they wish they'd never left. Victoria looked at him with something approaching awe. How old are you really? Because the things you say. Marcus smiled. 17 years old, 18 next month. But I've been taking care of myself for so long that sometimes I feel ancient. Foster care teaches you to see things clearly. You can't afford the luxury of self-deception when survival depends on reading people accurately. And what do you see when you read me? The question hung between them, vulnerable and searching. Marcus considered his answer carefully. I see someone who built everything she thought she wanted and discovered it wasn't enough. Someone who's been successful at everything except the things that actually matter. Someone who spent 30 years punishing herself for mistakes that were probably inevitable. Victoria's breath caught. But mostly, Marcus continued, I see someone who's ready to stop running from the people who love her, even if she doesn't quite believe she deserves that love yet. Before Victoria could respond, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face bright with relief and excitement. He's awake, she said. And he's asking for both of you. Marcus and Victoria exchanged a look, part hope, part terror, complete understanding. Ready? Marcus asked. Victoria straightened her shoulders, calling on reserves of courage she'd forgotten she possessed. Ready. They walked into Harold's room together, toward a conversation that would either heal 3 decades of wounds or reveal that some bridges were too broken to rebuild. Harold Ashford lay propped up in the hospital bed, looking frail but alert, his eyes bright with the intelligence that had built and lost and might yet build again. When he saw Victoria, his expression cycled through surprise, joy, and something that might have been relief. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough from medication but steady with emotion. "Eleanor said you were here, but I thought I might be dreaming." Victoria approached the bed slowly, as if sudden movements might shatter whatever fragile peace they'd managed to create. "Hi, Dad," she said simply. Harold's eyes filled with tears. Eleanor had been right about the crying, and he reached out with a trembling hand. Victoria took it, feeling 30 years of distance collapse into this single moment of connection. "I've missed you," Harold whispered. "Every single day, I've missed my little girl." "I've missed you too," Victoria replied, her own tears falling freely now. "Both of you. So much." Marcus watched from near the doorway, giving the family space while staying close enough to offer support if needed. This was what healing looked like, messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful. Harold's attention shifted to Marcus, his expression growing thoughtful. "Eleanor tells me you're the young man who helped us at the diner. And that you've been trying to take care of us since I landed in here." Marcus stepped forward. "Yes, sir. Though I think it's more accurate to say you've been taking care of me." Harold studied him with the same intensity Victoria had shown, seeing past the surface to whatever lay beneath. "Eleanor also tells me you work for my daughter's company. That she gave you a job and an apartment after seeing what you did for us." "That's right." Harold was quiet for a long moment, processing connections and implications with the sharp mind that had once built a successful business from nothing. "So let me see if I understand this correctly," he said finally. "You helped 2 strangers at a diner, which impressed my daughter enough that she decided to help you. Now you want to help us pay for my surgery, which would make you the bridge between a father and daughter who've been too proud to cross the gap themselves." Marcus nodded. Harold looked at Victoria, then back at Marcus, then began to laugh, a sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. 40 years of marriage, and Eleanor still insists the universe has a plan. I'm starting to think she might be right. He squeezed Victoria's hand tighter. "Sweetheart, I owe you an apology that's 30 years overdue. I let my pride and my hurt turn me into someone who could reject his own daughter. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Victoria shook her head. "Dad, what I did to your company. What you did was business. Ruthless business, maybe, but business nonetheless. What I did was let business become personal, and that was my mistake, not yours." Harold's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I taught you to be strong and ambitious and successful. I can't punish you for becoming everything I hoped you'd be just because you did it better than I ever could." The room fell silent except for the quiet beeping of medical equipment and the sound of 3 people crying, tears of relief, of forgiveness, of love finally allowed to flow freely after decades of drought. Marcus stepped back toward the door, instinctively understanding that this moment belonged to the Ashford family. But Harold's voice stopped him. "Where do you think you're going, son?" Marcus turned back, surprised. "Eleanor's right, you're family now. Not because of blood or legal documents, but because you chose to be. Because when strangers needed help, you gave everything you had. Because when we needed advocates, you stepped up without being asked. That makes you an Ashford in every way that matters." Harold's expression grew serious. "But I want you to understand something about the surgery, about the money. I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express, but I won't let you sacrifice your future for my health. Mr. Ashford." "Harold. And let me finish." The old man's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades making difficult decisions. "I accept your help, but as a loan. You'll be paid back every penny, with interest, as soon as I'm well enough to work again." Marcus started to protest, but Harold held up a hand. "This isn't negotiable. I'm 73 years old, and I may not have many more chances to teach important lessons. This is one of them. Accepting help gracefully is part of dignity, but so is taking responsibility for your debts. You've given me the gift of being able to choose healing over pride. Let me give you the gift of understanding that independence and interdependence can coexist. Victoria watched this exchange with growing emotion, seeing her father's wisdom and Marcus's character weaving together into something that looked remarkably like hope. Besides, Harold continued, his eyes twinkling with humor that reminded Victoria of her childhood, I have it on good authority that my daughter runs a pretty successful company. I might be able to find some work there, assuming she needs someone with experience in manufacturing and a tendency toward stubborn integrity. Victoria laughed through her tears. I think we might have an opening for someone with those qualifications. Eleanor beamed from her chair. Eleanor beamed from her chair beside the bed, watching her husband and daughter rediscover each other with the satisfaction of someone who'd never stopped believing in happy endings. Now then, Harold said, settling back against his pillows with the air of a man who'd just solved a complicated equation, I believe we have a surgery to prepare for and a family to put back together. Eleanor, would you mind calling Dr. Patel? Tell him we're ready to proceed. As Eleanor hurried out to find the doctor, Victoria moved closer to her father's bedside. Dad, about the company offer, I meant it. But I want you to know it's not charity. We genuinely need someone with your experience overseeing our quality control division. Harold's eyes sharpened with interest. Quality control? We've been having issues with some of our overseas suppliers. Product defects, missed specifications, the kind of problems that damage reputation and cost money in the long run. Victoria's voice grew more animated as she shifted into business mode. I've been looking for someone who understands that quality isn't just about meeting minimum standards, it's about pride in craftsmanship. That sounds like the kind of work I could sink my teeth into, Harold admitted. Though I should warn you, I haven't mellowed much in my old age. If I see corners being cut or workers being treated poorly, I'd be disappointed if you had mellowed, Victoria interrupted. The company needs someone who isn't afraid to tell the CEO when she's wrong. Marcus watched this exchange with fascination, seeing glimpses of the relationship that had existed before pride and hurt had driven them apart. Victoria and Harold shared the same intensity when discussing work, the same inability to accept mediocrity, the same fundamental belief that how you did things mattered as much as what you accomplished. What about you, Marcus? Harold asked, turning his attention to the young man who'd become an unexpected catalyst for their reunion. What are your long-term plans? Victoria mentioned you're in the trainee program, but what do you really want to do? Marcus hesitated, unused to having adults take genuine interest in his aspirations. I've always been interested in engineering. Mechanical engineering, specifically. I like understanding how things work, how to make them work better. College plans? I've been looking into community college programs, maybe evening classes so I can keep working. Marcus shrugged, trying to appear casual about dreams he'd barely dared to voice. It'll take longer that way, but I can afford it without taking on too much debt. Harold and Victoria exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. What if there was another option? Victoria asked carefully. Ashford Industries has partnerships with several universities. We sponsor employees who show promise, cover tuition and expenses in exchange for a commitment to work with us after graduation. Marcus felt his heart skip. What kind of commitment? 5 years post-graduation, with guaranteed promotion opportunities and project leadership roles. You'd essentially be fast-tracked into our engineering department. Victoria's voice grew more excited as she outlined the possibilities. We'd start you at State University in the fall, full-time student, with a salary that covers your living expenses and a clear path to exactly the career you want. Victoria, Harold interjected gently, that's very generous, but Marcus needs to understand that accepting help like this comes with expectations. Sponsored students represent the company. Their academic performance reflects on us. Marcus appreciated Harold's directness. What kind of expectations? Maintain a 3.5 GPA or higher. Complete your degree within 4 years. Participate in internships and co-op programs during summers. Basically, prove that our investment in you was justified. And if I don't meet those standards? Then you pay back the sponsorship costs at market rates, Victoria said simply. It's not a gift, Marcus, it's an investment in mutual success. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, overwhelmed by the scope of what was being offered. Full university sponsorship, guaranteed employment, a clear path from poverty to professional success. It was more opportunity than he'd imagined possible even in his most optimistic moments. Why? He asked finally. Why invest so much in someone you barely know? Harold answered before Victoria could speak. Because character is rare, and intelligence without character is dangerous. You've proven you have both. Because my daughter has built something worth preserving, and preserving it means investing in people who share our values. He paused, his expression growing more serious. And because sometimes, son, the universe puts people in your path for reasons you don't understand until much later. You helped two strangers in a diner, which led my daughter to help you, which led to this moment when a broken family gets put back together. That's not coincidence, that's providence. Eleanor returned with Dr. Patel, a small, efficient man with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone who delivered life-changing news on a daily basis. Mr. Ashford, I understand you're ready to proceed with the surgery? I am. Harold's voice was strong, confident. When can we schedule it? First thing tomorrow morning, if that works for you. The surgical team is excellent, and your preoperative tests look good. With proper care and rehabilitation, there's no reason you shouldn't make a full recovery. Relief flooded the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Doctor, Eleanor said, what about after the surgery? What kind of care will he need at home? Dr. Patel smiled. Standard post-surgical protocols. Rest, medication compliance, gradual increase in activity levels. Physical therapy will be important, and he'll need to avoid heavy lifting for several weeks. But Mr. Ashford seems to have an excellent support system. That's often the most important factor in successful recovery. Marcus felt a sudden pang of anxiety. Harold would need constant care during his recovery, but Eleanor was fragile herself, hardly equipped to handle the physical demands of post-surgical nursing. The hospital would probably recommend professional home care, which would be expensive and impersonal. What if he stayed with family during recovery? Marcus heard himself ask. Someone younger who could help with the physical aspects of care? Everyone looked at him. I have a studio apartment, which isn't ideal, but Victoria, don't you have space? Somewhere Harold could recover comfortably with proper care? Victoria's face lit up with understanding. The guest house. It's perfect, one level, accessible, close enough to the main house for Eleanor to have help when she needs it. Victoria, we couldn't possibly impose, Eleanor began. You couldn't possibly not, Victoria interrupted firmly. I have a 6-bedroom house that I rattle around in like a ghost. The guest house has been empty for years. It would mean everything to me to have you both close by. Harold was watching this exchange with growing emotion. You're both very kind, but... Dad. Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. For 30 years, I've had money and no family to spend it on. Now I have family again. Please let me take care of you, the way you took care of me when I was small. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft sound of Eleanor crying happy tears. All right, Harold said finally. But I have conditions. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Of course you do. I pay rent on the guest house. Market rate. Dad. Market rate, Harold repeated firmly. And Eleanor helps with household management, cooking, organizing, the things she's always been good at. We contribute to the family, we don't just take from it. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but Marcus caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Harold needed to maintain his dignity through contribution, even if that contribution was largely symbolic. Agreed, Victoria said. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook and my housekeeping skills are limited to hiring other people to clean things. Eleanor laughed. Well then, it sounds like we'll all be earning our keep. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. This all sounds wonderful, but I should mention that Mr. Ashford will need to rest now. Surgery prep starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow, and he needs his strength. As the doctor left, the family began the awkward dance of goodbyes and reassurances. Eleanor would spend the night in Harold's room, Victoria would handle the insurance paperwork and guest house preparations, and Marcus would coordinate with his supervisor about taking time off to help during the recovery period. "Marcus," Harold called as the young man prepared to leave. "Yes, sir." "That university sponsorship offer, I want you to think about it seriously. But don't feel pressured to decide immediately. Something this important deserves careful consideration." Marcus nodded. "I will." "And Harold?" "Yes. Thank you. For including me in your family. For treating me like I belong somewhere." Harold's eyes grew bright with tears again. "Son, you've given us each other back. That makes you more than family, it makes you a miracle." As Marcus walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, his mind reeled with everything that had changed in the space of a single afternoon. This morning, he'd been a former foster kid with an entry-level job and a studio apartment, grateful for stability but hardly daring to dream of more. Now he was part of a family, a complicated, wounded, healing family that somehow wanted him as much as he wanted them. The university sponsorship wasn't just an opportunity, it was a complete transformation of his future, a chance to become the engineer he'd dreamed of being since he was 12 years old and had taken apart his foster mother's radio to understand how sound became electricity became sound again. But even more than the practical opportunities, it was the sense of belonging that overwhelmed him. For the first time in his life, he was part of something larger than survival. He had people who cared whether he succeeded, who would celebrate his victories and support him through failures. The autumn evening was crisp and clear, with the kind of sky that made the city look almost beautiful. Marcus walked slowly toward his apartment, savoring the feeling of having somewhere to go that was truly his own. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Marcus, this is Victoria. Wanted to make sure you had my personal number. Thank you for giving me my parents back. We'll talk soon about university applications. The deadline for spring admission is next month, if you're interested. Sleep well. You've earned it." Marcus smiled, typing back, "Thank you for giving me a family. See you tomorrow." He looked up at the sky, thinking about providence and coincidence and the strange ways kindness could multiply across generations. Tomorrow, Harold would have surgery to repair his damaged heart. Soon, if all went well, they'd be a real family, chosen rather than biological, but no less genuine for that choice. Marcus Thompson, who had started the week with $5 and a growling stomach, was ending it with more wealth than he'd ever imagined possible. Not money, though that was coming too, but something far more valuable, a place in the world where he was wanted, needed, loved. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Marcus made a mental note to call Giuseppe tomorrow, to tell the old Italian man who'd shown him kindness when kindness mattered most that his faith in human goodness had been justified in ways he could never have imagined. Some stories, Marcus reflected, were too beautiful to be anything but true. But he had no way of knowing that the most surprising chapter of his story was still to come, that the family he'd found through coincidence and kindness was about to reveal connections that went deeper than anyone had suspected, and that the universe's sense of providence was even more elaborate than any of them had dared to believe. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 5. 3 weeks after Harold's successful surgery, the Ashford family guest house had been transformed into something that resembled a home for the first time in years. Eleanor's touch was everywhere, fresh flowers from the garden she'd coaxed back to life, the smell of homemade bread drifting from the kitchen, photographs of Victoria as a child arranged carefully on the mantel alongside newer pictures that captured their tentative but growing reunion. Marcus had taken extended leave from his trainee program to help with Harold's recovery, a decision that had surprised everyone except Victoria, who understood that loyalty was as essential to Marcus's character as breathing. He arrived each morning with coffee and fresh newspapers, spent afternoons helping Harold with physical therapy exercises, and evenings listening to stories about the Ashford family history he was slowly becoming part of. It was during one of those evening conversations that Harold mentioned, almost casually, the brother Victoria had lost. "You remind me of someone," Harold said to Marcus as they sat on the guest house porch, watching the sunset paint Victoria's perfectly manicured garden in shades of gold. My son, David. Victoria's younger brother. Marcus felt something shift in the air, a subtle tension that made him look up from the engineering textbook he'd been reading. Eleanor, who had been knitting quietly in her chair, had gone very still. I didn't know Victoria had a brother, Marcus said carefully. Harold's expression grew distant. She doesn't talk about him. Too painful, I think. David died when he was 25. Car accident on a rainy night not unlike the one when you helped us at the diner. I'm sorry, Marcus said, meaning it. He'd learned that the Ashford family carried their grief quietly, but it shaped them nonetheless. David was, well, he was a lot like you, actually. Same age when he died as you are now. Same idealistic belief that the world could be better if people just tried harder to take care of each other. Harold smiled sadly. He was going to be a social worker, wanted to help kids in the system. Said he was going to change how foster care worked, make sure no child ever felt unwanted again. Marcus's chest tightened. The description hit too close to home, touched dreams he'd barely allowed himself to acknowledge. David was the one who kept Victoria and me connected during those early years of our disagreement, Harold continued. He believed family was sacred, that business was just business but blood was forever. He spent his last few years trying to broker peace between us. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. David would have loved you, Marcus. He always said the world needed more people who chose kindness even when kindness was hard. That night, Marcus found himself unable to sleep, David's story echoing in his mind alongside questions he'd never been brave enough to ask about his own origins. He'd been told his mother died when he was 2, that his father was unknown, that he had no family worth finding. But sitting in the Ashford guest house, surrounded by evidence of how families could lose each other and find each other again, Marcus began to wonder if his own story might be more complicated than the sparse details in his case file suggested. The next morning, he found Victoria in her home office, surrounded by university brochures and scholarship applications. She'd been preparing his sponsorship paperwork with the thoroughness she brought to major business acquisitions, treating his education like the important investment it was. Victoria, Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her desk, can I ask you something personal? She looked up, immediately alert to the seriousness in his tone. Of course. Harold mentioned your brother last night. David. Victoria's face went carefully blank, the same controlled expression she wore during difficult board meetings. What about him? He said David died 25 years ago. That he was trying to help kids in foster care. Yes. Victoria's voice was steady, but Marcus caught the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her pen. David was the best of all of us. The one who believed in redemption and second chances, who thought love could overcome anything if you just refused to give up on people. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at something Marcus couldn't see. Losing him nearly destroyed our family completely. Dad and I were already estranged because of the business situation, and David was the bridge between us. When he died, that bridge collapsed, and we spent the next 25 years on opposite sides of a canyon we'd created ourselves. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle shifting in his mind, connections forming that he wasn't sure he was ready to understand. What was David's full name? Victoria looked at him sharply. Why? I'm probably wrong, but, could you just tell me? David Marcus Ashford. Victoria's eyes widened as she spoke the words. Oh my God. Marcus David Thompson. The names are reversed, Marcus finished quietly. Victoria, I need to see my case file. The real one, not just the sanitized version they give to foster kids. Can you help me get access to it? Victoria was already reaching for her phone. I know someone in family services. Give me an hour. 2 hours later, Marcus sat in Victoria's office staring at documents that rewrote everything he thought he knew about himself. The case file was thick, full of details that painted a picture both heartbreaking and eerily familiar. Jennifer Marie Thompson, 16 years old when she gave birth to Marcus David Thompson. Listed father, David Marcus Ashford, 23 years old, deceased in automobile accident 2 months before birth. Jennifer had been a runaway, a foster kid herself who'd aged out of the system with no resources and no family. She'd met David at a community center where he'd been volunteering, helping teenagers navigate the bureaucracy that governed their lives. They'd fallen in love with the intensity possible only when two people recognized their shared wounds, their mutual understanding of what it meant to be unwanted by the world. David had planned to marry Jennifer, to create the family neither of them had ever really known. But on a rainy November night, driving to pick her up from her part-time job at a diner across town, his car had skidded on wet pavement and collided with a tree. He died instantly, 2 months before his son was born, never knowing he was going to be a father. Jennifer had hidden her pregnancy from everyone, including David's family. The case notes revealed her reasoning in her own words: David's family already hates him for choosing someone like me. They don't need the burden of his bastard child reminding them of their disappointment. She'd given birth alone, naming her son with the reversed version of his father's name, the only legacy she could give him from a man she'd loved completely and lost too soon. For 2 years, she tried to build a life for them both, working multiple jobs and living in whatever housing she could afford. But addiction was a patient predator, and poverty made people vulnerable to its promises. Jennifer had started using to cope with exhaustion and grief, graduated to dealing to pay for her habit, and finally overdosed in a motel room while 2-year-old Marcus slept in the bed beside her. The last entry in the file was from the social worker who'd found Marcus. Child appears healthy but understandably traumatized. No known family members. Father deceased, mother an orphan herself. Placing in foster care system. Marcus set down the file with trembling hands. He was David Ashford's son. Victoria's nephew. Harold and Eleanor's grandson. The family he'd fallen in love with, the people who'd welcomed him and invested in his future and made him feel like he belonged somewhere, they were his actual family, connected to him not just by kindness but by blood. Marcus. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. If we had known, if David had told us about Jennifer, about you. You would have raised me, Marcus said quietly, the truth of it settling into his bones. I would have grown up here, with you and Harold and Eleanor. David's son, instead of a foster kid with no name and no history. Victoria was crying openly now, 30 years of grief and regret pouring out in a flood of tears she'd held back too long. We looked for anything of David's after he died, any connection to the life he'd been building. But Jennifer kept their relationship secret. We never knew about you, never knew David had left us the most precious gift possible. Marcus felt his own tears coming, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of completion, of understanding, of finally having answers to questions that had haunted him his entire life. All those years, he said, all those foster homes where I never quite fit, where I always felt like I was waiting for something. I was waiting to come home. I was waiting to find you. Victoria reached across the desk and took his hands. You are home now. You're where you belong, where you should have been all along. Does this change things? Marcus asked. The job sponsorship, the university program, does knowing I'm David's son make it different? Victoria looked at him with fierce pride. Marcus, you earned every opportunity through your own merit, your own character. Learning that you're my nephew doesn't diminish your accomplishments. It explains why I recognized something special in you from the very beginning. David's son would be extraordinary, and you are. She squeezed his hands tighter. But it does change one thing. You're not just an investment in our company's future anymore. You're an investment in our family's future. You're David's legacy, the part of him that gets to live on and accomplish all the things he dreamed of doing. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing emotions too big for words. We have to tell Harold and Eleanor. Yes. But Marcus, this might be overwhelming for them. They've just gotten their daughter back, and now to discover they have a grandson. They're stronger than you think, Marcus said, remembering Harold's quiet dignity in the hospital, Eleanor's fierce love for her family. And they deserve to know that David's love story didn't end in tragedy. That something beautiful came from it. Victoria nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Together then? We tell them together? Together. As they walked toward the guest house, Marcus felt the final pieces of his identity clicking into place. He wasn't Marcus Thompson, the foster kid with no history and no future. He was Marcus David Ashford, son of David Marcus Ashford, grandson of Harold and Eleanor Ashford, nephew of Victoria Ashford. He was home at last, not through charity or luck, but through the kind of cosmic justice that his father had believed in, the belief that love could overcome anything if you just refused to give up on people. But as they approached the guest house, Marcus could see through the window that something was wrong. Eleanor was on the phone, her face pale with fear, while Harold sat in his chair looking gray and breathless. Victoria and Marcus broke into a run. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 6. It's David Martinez from the plant, Eleanor said as they rushed through the door. There's been an accident. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. David Martinez was his supervisor, his mentor, the man who'd believed in his potential from day one. If something had happened to him. What kind of accident? Victoria asked, immediately shifting into crisis management mode. Harold answered, his voice strained but steady. Equipment malfunction in the fabrication unit. David was helping evacuate workers when a support beam came down. He's alive, but he's trapped, and they can't get to him safely. Victoria was already calling her plant manager, barking orders about emergency protocols and safety procedures. But Marcus was remembering something David had told him during his first week of training: the fabrication unit is my responsibility. Every person who works in there goes home safe to their family, or I don't go home to mine. I know that area, Marcus said suddenly. David's been training me on the equipment layouts, emergency procedures. I know where he'd be, how to get to him. Absolutely not, Victoria said firmly. Marcus, you're not trained for emergency rescue. But I know the space. I know David. And I'm small enough to get through areas the regular rescue team can't navigate. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Victoria, he saved my career, my future. I can't just sit here while he's trapped. Harold struggled to his feet, ignoring Eleanor's protests. The boy's right, Victoria. Sometimes being family means taking risks for each other. Dad, you just had heart surgery. Which is why I understand how precious time is, Harold interrupted. Marcus, if you're going to do this, you do it smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. You get David out and you both come home safe. Eleanor was crying, but she nodded her agreement. David has children, grandchildren. If Marcus can help save him. Victoria looked between her father's determined face and Marcus's resolute expression, seeing generations of Ashford stubbornness reflected back at her. All right, she said finally. But I'm coming with you. And we do this by the book, no improvisation, no taking chances that might make the situation worse. They drove to the plant in tense silence, emergency lights flashing around them as they approached the industrial complex that had been Victoria's life's work and was now the site of potential tragedy. The fabrication unit was cordoned off, fire trucks and ambulances standing ready while rescue workers debated the safest approach. The problem is the support structure, the fire chief explained as Victoria and Marcus approached. The beam that came down destabilized the entire section. We can hear Martinez calling for help, but any attempt to move the debris could bring down more of the ceiling. Marcus studied the building's blueprint, his engineering training helping him visualize the internal structure. There's a maintenance crawlway that runs parallel to the main fabrication area. If I can get through there, I might be able to reach David from the side instead of going through the unstable area. The fire chief looked skeptical. Son, that crawlway is 18 inches wide at its narrowest point. Even if you could fit through, you'd be crawling blind into a potentially collapsing structure. But it's a chance, Marcus said. And right now, it might be the only chance David has. Victoria gripped his arm. Marcus, please. I just found you, I just discovered you're my nephew. I can't lose you the same way I lost your father. Marcus looked at her with eyes that held David's kindness and Harold's determination. Victoria, you didn't lose my father. You lost touch with him, but his values, his belief in helping people, that lives on. Let me honor that. Let me be the man he would have wanted his son to be. After what felt like an eternity of debate and preparation, Marcus found himself suited up in protective gear, crawling through a maintenance tunnel barely wider than his shoulders. The space was dark, cramped, filled with the groaning sounds of stressed metal and the distant echo of David's voice calling for help. Marcus had always been good at staying calm in tight spaces, a skill learned during years of hiding in foster home closets and school bathrooms when the world became too much to handle. But this was different. This was about more than self-preservation. It was about proving he deserved the faith so many people had placed in him. David. Marcus called as he reached the area where his supervisor should be trapped. David, it's Marcus Thompson. Can you hear me? Marcus? David's voice was closer now, strained but alert. Kid, what the hell are you doing in here? This place is about to come down. That's why I'm here, Marcus called back, following David's voice through the maze of support beams and debris. To get you out before it does. He found David pinned beneath a section of conveyor equipment, conscious but clearly in pain. The man who'd believed in Marcus's potential, who'd treated him like the son he'd never had, was trapped in a space that seemed to shrink with every creak and groan of the damaged structure. How bad are you hurt? Marcus asked, assessing the situation with the methodical approach David himself had taught him. Legs definitely broken, maybe some ribs. But Marcus, you can't lift this equipment alone. It's too heavy, and the structure's too unstable. Marcus studied the debris pile, his mind working through the physics of leverage and mechanical advantage. I don't need to lift it. I need to shift it. David, do you trust me? With my life, apparently, David replied with a weak smile. Marcus had brought rope and pulleys from the emergency kit, simple tools that could multiply force when applied correctly. It took 20 minutes of careful work, repositioning support points and creating mechanical advantage, but finally the conveyor section lifted enough for David to drag himself free. Getting back through the maintenance tunnel with an injured man was harder than getting in alone had been. Every movement had to be calculated, every sound analyzed to determine whether the structure was holding or beginning its final collapse. But Marcus had learned patience in foster care, persistence in poverty, and determination in the face of impossible odds. When they finally emerged from the building, supported by rescue workers and surrounded by emergency lights, Marcus saw Victoria, Harold, and Eleanor waiting with expressions of relief so intense it made his chest ache with unexpected belonging. You did it, Victoria said, wrapping him in a hug that felt like coming home. You brought him back. David Martinez, despite his injuries, insisted on shaking Marcus's hand before the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said. Your father would be proud. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. David Martinez didn't know about the family connection, didn't understand the layers of meaning in what he'd just said. But Marcus knew, and looking at Victoria's tears, Harold's proud smile, and Eleanor's loving expression, he understood that he'd finally done something worthy of the Ashford name. Later, after the interviews with investigators and the paperwork with insurance companies, the four of them sat in Victoria's living room, the main house, not the guest house, because Eleanor had insisted that family belonged together. There's something we need to tell you both, Victoria said to her parents, glancing at Marcus for confirmation. Over the next hour, they shared the story of David Marcus Ashford and Jennifer Marie Thompson, of love found and lost and rediscovered in the form of a son who'd been searching for home his entire life. They told Harold and Eleanor about the case files and the reverse names, about the cosmic coincidences that had brought them all together at Riverside Diner on a rainy Tuesday night. Harold listened with the intensity he'd once brought to engineering problems, processing information and connections with the sharp mind that had built and lost and was now helping to rebuild a family legacy. When the story was finished, he looked at Marcus with tears streaming down his face. David's boy, he whispered. My grandson. Eleanor, we have a grandson. Eleanor was too overwhelmed to speak, but she reached for Marcus with trembling hands, pulling him into a hug that felt like every birthday and Christmas and family dinner he'd missed over the past 18 years. I'm so sorry, she said through her tears. So sorry we didn't know, didn't find you, didn't save you from all those years of being alone. Marcus held his grandmother, and felt the last empty spaces in his heart fill with warmth. You couldn't have known. But you found me eventually, and that's what matters. Harold struggled to his feet, moving carefully but determinedly toward Marcus. When he reached his grandson, he placed both hands on Marcus's shoulders with the gravity of a blessing. Marcus David Ashford, he said formally. Son of David Marcus Ashford, grandson of Harold James Ashford and Eleanor Marie Ashford. Welcome home. Victoria watched her father officially claim Marcus as family, seeing the completion of a circle that had been broken 30 years ago. David was gone, but his son was here, carrying forward the best parts of what David had been while adding his own strength and courage to the family legacy. There's one more thing, Victoria said, reaching into her briefcase for legal documents she'd had prepared weeks ago, before they'd known about the family connection. Marcus, I want you to know that the university sponsorship, the job opportunities, all of it, those offers stand regardless of what we've learned today. You earned them through your own merit. She handed him an envelope. But there's also this. Marcus opened it to find adoption papers, not legal adoption, since he was 18 and didn't need a guardian, but a formal declaration of family recognition, making him legally and officially Marcus David Ashford if he chose to accept it. I know you've been Marcus Thompson your whole life, Victoria said carefully. And if you want to keep that name, we'll understand. But if you want to claim your heritage, to be officially recognized as David's son. Marcus looked around the room at the three people who'd become his world, Victoria with her fierce intelligence and hidden vulnerability, Harold with his quiet strength and hard-earned wisdom, Eleanor with her gentle love and unshakable faith in family. These were his people. This was his home. This was the life his father had dreamed of giving him, brought to fruition through coincidence and kindness and the mysterious ways love could transcend death itself. Marcus David Ashford, he said, testing the name on his tongue. I like how that sounds. Eleanor clasped her hands together with joy. David Marcus Ashford's son, coming home at last. As the evening settled around them, filled with stories and plans and the comfortable noise of family learning to be family again, Marcus felt the profound peace of finally knowing who he was and where he belonged. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't finished with surprises yet. The phone call that came just as they were settling down for the night would reveal that the connections binding them together ran even deeper than any of them had imagined, and that some stories were so beautiful, so impossible, that they could only be true. Victoria, the voice on the other end said, "This is Detective Rodriguez from downtown. I've been investigating your brother David's accident from 25 years ago, and I found something I think you need to know." Victoria's blood went cold. "Detective, I'm not sure what you mean." David's case was closed decades ago. That's just it, ma'am. It was never supposed to be closed. There are documents that were misfiled, evidence that was never properly investigated. I think there's more to your brother's story than you know. And I think it's connected to something that happened just this week. Victoria looked at Marcus, Harold, and Eleanor, seeing her own confusion reflected in their faces. Just when they'd thought they had all the answers, it seemed the questions were only beginning. What kind of evidence, detective? The kind that might change everything you think you know about how David died, and why. Can you come down to the station tomorrow morning? All of you. There's something you need to see. As Victoria hung up the phone, she realized that their family reunion was about to become something even more extraordinary, and potentially more dangerous, than any of them had prepared for. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 7. The downtown police station felt like a different world from the warm intimacy of Victoria's living room. Detective Rodriguez was a small, efficient woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades delivering news that changed lives forever. I want to start by saying that what I'm about to tell you doesn't change the fundamental facts, she said, spreading files across the conference table. David Ashford died in a car accident 25 years ago. That part is true. But the circumstances, well, they weren't what anyone thought. Marcus sat between Victoria and Eleanor, Harold's hand resting supportively on his shoulder. The family unity they'd just discovered felt fragile in this sterile room, threatened by whatever revelations were coming. "Detective," Victoria said carefully, "I was told David's car skidded on wet pavement. An accident, pure and simple." "That's what the initial report said, yes. But there was a witness, a homeless man who saw the whole thing but wasn't taken seriously at the time. He kept trying to tell anyone who'd listen that David's car didn't just skid. It was forced off the road." The room went completely silent. "Forced off the road?" Harold's voice was barely a whisper. Detective Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The witness, a man named Thomas Chen, described a black sedan that had been following David's car. When David slowed down for the curve where he ultimately crashed, the sedan accelerated and performed what's called a pit maneuver, a tactical ramming technique that causes the target vehicle to spin out of control." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "You're saying someone murdered my father?" "That's what the evidence suggests, yes. The problem was, Thomas Chen was homeless and had a history of substance abuse, so nobody took his testimony seriously. By the time anyone thought to investigate further, the physical evidence had been compromised." Victoria leaned forward, her business instincts kicking in despite the emotional chaos. "Why are you telling us this now? What changed?" "Thomas Chen died last week. Natural causes. He was in his 70s, had been clean and sober for 15 years, working as a janitor at City General Hospital. Before he died, he made a deathbed confession to his sponsor, insisting that he'd witnessed a murder 25 years ago and that the victim had a family who deserved to know the truth." Eleanor's hands were shaking. "But why would anyone want to hurt David? He was just a social worker, someone who helped children. He didn't have enemies." Detective Rodriguez exchanged a look with her partner, who'd been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation. "That's where it gets complicated," she said. "We've been investigating Thomas's claims, and we discovered something interesting about David's caseload at the time of his death. He was working on placing a particularly difficult case, a teenage girl who'd been in the system for years, who'd witnessed something that made her a target." Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind, connections forming that made his stomach clench with dread. "Jennifer Thompson," he said quietly. Detective Rodriguez looked surprised. "How did you know that?" "Because Jennifer Thompson was my mother. And because I'm starting to understand that nothing about my family's story is as simple as we thought." The detective consulted her notes. Jennifer had been placed in multiple foster homes throughout her childhood, but she kept running away. According to David's files, she'd witnessed a murder when she was 15, a drug deal gone wrong that resulted in the death of a police officer. She was supposed to testify against the dealers, but she disappeared before the trial. "David found her," Victoria said, understanding dawning in her voice. "David found her and was trying to protect her." "More than that," Detective Rodriguez continued. "David had convinced Jennifer to testify." The trial was scheduled for December of that year, 2 weeks after David's accident. With both David and Jennifer gone, the case against the dealers collapsed. Harold's face had gone gray with anger and grief. "They killed my son to protect drug dealers. They murdered David to silence a witness. That's what we believe, yes. And here's the thing, one of those dealers, a man named Vincent Caruso, was released from prison just last month after serving 24 years for unrelated charges. We have reason to believe he's been tracking down loose ends from his old operation." Marcus felt cold dread spreading through his chest. "What kind of loose ends?" "The kind that might include the son of the witness who was supposed to testify against him." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Not only was his father murdered, but his own life might be in danger because of events that happened before he was born. "We can offer you protection," Detective Rodriguez said. "All of you." Caruso's operation was extensive, and eliminating witnesses seems to be a priority for him now that he's out. Victoria reached for Marcus's hand, but he pulled away, standing abruptly and pacing to the window that looked out over the city where he'd spent his entire life running from dangers he hadn't even known existed. "Marcus?" Eleanor's voice was full of concern. "I need some air," he said without turning around. "I need to think." "Son," Harold began, but Marcus was already moving toward the door. "I'm sorry." I need some time to process this. He walked out of the police station and into the crisp morning air, his mind reeling with revelations that made everything he'd thought he understood about his life seem like a carefully constructed lie. His father hadn't died in a random accident, he'd been murdered trying to protect the woman who would become Marcus's mother. Jennifer hadn't overdosed because of depression and poverty, she'd been living in hiding, terrified that the people who'd killed David would come for her too. And Marcus himself wasn't just an unlucky foster kid who'd finally caught a break. He was the son of a murdered social worker and a witness in hiding, potentially targeted by criminals who'd already destroyed his family once. The weight of it all was crushing. Every good thing that had happened to him, meeting Harold and Eleanor, Victoria's job offer, the university sponsorship, the family reunion, all of it felt tainted now by the knowledge that it was built on tragedy and danger. Marcus found himself walking toward Riverside Park, the place where he'd slept when he had nowhere else to go, the place where Victoria had first approached him with an offer that had seemed too good to be true. Maybe it had been too good to be true. Maybe the universe didn't actually reward kindness, maybe it just set you up for bigger falls. He sat on the same bench where he'd written in his journal just weeks ago, back when his biggest worry was where his next meal would come from. Now he was surrounded by family who loved him, with opportunities he'd never dreamed possible, and somehow everything felt more precarious than it had when he'd had nothing. His phone buzzed with text messages, Victoria asking where he was, Eleanor begging him to come home, Harold promising they'd face whatever came next together. But Marcus turned off the phone and sat in the growing darkness, trying to figure out who he was now that everything he'd thought he knew about himself had changed. Was he Marcus Thompson, the foster kid who'd earned his way through determination and character? Or was he Marcus David Ashford, the heir to a family legacy, given opportunities because of blood rather than merit? Was his kindness genuine, or was it programmed into him by genetics and circumstance? Were his accomplishments real, or were they just the inevitable result of finally being where he belonged? The questions circled in his mind like predators, tearing apart the confidence and sense of self he'd spent 18 years building from nothing. By the time Marcus made his decision, it was past midnight. He walked back to his apartment, the apartment Victoria had arranged, paid for with money that came from the success built on his grandfather's ruined business, and packed his few belongings into the same backpack he'd carried through countless foster homes. He left the apartment key on the kitchen counter, along with a note that took him an hour to write. Asterisk Victoria, Harold, Eleanor, I need you to know that the time we've spent together has been the happiest of my life. You gave me something I'd never had before, a sense of belonging, of being wanted and valued. That gift is precious, and I will treasure it always. But I can't stay. Not knowing what I know now about why my father died, about the danger I might bring to your lives, about the fact that every opportunity I've been given comes with strings attached that I never saw. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not David's son or Victoria's nephew or Harold and Eleanor's grandson. I need to know that my character is my own, that my accomplishments mean something beyond family obligation. Please don't try to find me. I love you all too much to let my presence put you at risk, and I respect myself too much to accept help that I haven't earned on my own merit. Thank you for showing me what family looks like. Someday, when I'm worthy of it, I hope I can find my way back to you. Marcus *. He walked through the pre-dawn streets toward the bus station, carrying everything he owned and leaving behind everything that mattered. The city looked different in the gray light, smaller somehow, less threatening now that he understood he'd always belonged somewhere in it. But belonging came with responsibilities he wasn't sure he was ready for, and expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. Better to leave while the love was still pure, before reality had a chance to tarnish the perfect family reunion they'd created. Marcus bought a ticket to Chicago with money from his last paycheck, money he'd earned, not been given, and settled into a seat near the back of the bus. As the city disappeared behind him, he tried not to think about the family he was leaving heartbroken, or the future he was walking away from. He tried not to wonder if running away made him more like his mother than his father, or if staying and fighting would have been the braver choice. But as the miles stretched between him and the only home he'd ever known, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. If you are enjoying this video, do well to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Chapter 8. 3 days after Marcus disappeared, Giuseppe Martinelli was closing down Riverside Diner for the night when he noticed the police car parked outside. Detective Rodriguez climbed out, followed by a woman he recognized, the lady who'd been there the night the young man helped the elderly couple. "Excuse me," Detective Rodriguez said as Giuseppe locked the front door. "I'm looking for someone who might have come by here." "Marcus Thompson?" Young man, 18, about 5'10", usually carries a backpack. Giuseppe's weathered face creased with concern. "Marcus? Is he in trouble?" "He's a good boy, that one." Victoria stepped forward, her expensive clothes and obvious distress making an odd combination. "He's not in trouble, exactly. But he's missing, and we're very worried about him." "Missing?" Giuseppe unlocked the diner and gestured for them to come in. Sit. Tell Giuseppe what's happening." Over coffee and leftover cannoli, Victoria and Detective Rodriguez explained the situation, carefully, since Giuseppe didn't need to know about the murder investigation, but thoroughly enough that he understood Marcus was running from family who loved him, not towards something dangerous. "Ah," Giuseppe said when they finished. "This is about pride, yes? About a young man who thinks accepting love makes him weak?" Victoria nodded, tears threatening again. "He left a note saying he needed to prove his worth on his own, that he couldn't accept help he hadn't earned. But he doesn't understand. We're not helping him because we have to. We're helping him because we want to, because he's family." Giuseppe was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into his espresso with the deliberate movements of someone thinking deeply. "You know," he said finally, "that night when Marcus helped the old couple, your parents, I watched him sit here for 3 hours before he made that choice. 3 hours of looking at that $5 bill, knowing it was all he had in the world." He looked directly at Victoria. "You want to know what I saw in his face? I saw someone who understood that being poor doesn't make you powerless, that sometimes the smallest gesture matters more than the biggest donation. That boy has more character in his little finger than most people have in their whole body." Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. "Mr. Martinelli, do you have any idea where Marcus might have gone? Any place he might consider safe?" Giuseppe shook his head. He never talked about other places, other people. "This diner, your family, I think you were all he had." Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Any word?" Eleanor's beside herself with worry. She showed the message to Giuseppe, who read it with the compassion of someone who'd spent 40 years watching human dramas play out in his restaurant. "You know what you need to do," Giuseppe said gently. "You need to show him that family isn't about obligation or debt or earning your place. Family is about choosing each other, again and again, even when it's complicated." "How do we do that if we can't find him?" Giuseppe smiled, the expression transforming his lined face. "You make sure he knows there's a place at the table waiting for him when he's ready to come home. And you trust that the same instincts that made him help strangers in a diner will eventually bring him back to the people who love him." 2 weeks later, Marcus was washing dishes in a Chicago diner that reminded him painfully of Riverside, when he saw the news report on the small TV mounted above the counter. Ashford Industries announced today a major new initiative to support aging-out foster youth, the anchor was saying. The David Marcus Ashford Foundation will provide housing, job training, and educational opportunities for teenagers transitioning out of the foster care system. Marcus dropped the plate he'd been cleaning, watching in stunned silence as the camera showed Victoria standing behind a podium, flanked by Harold and Eleanor. "My brother David believed that every child deserved a family, a future, and the support to achieve their dreams," Victoria was saying, her voice steady but her eyes red-rimmed with recent tears. "This foundation will ensure that no young person faces the transition to adulthood alone." The camera panned to show Harold speaking. "We've learned recently that family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing to care for each other, to invest in each other's success, to believe in each other's potential. The young people this foundation will serve are all someone's family, even if they don't know it yet." Eleanor appeared next, her voice soft but clear. "Sometimes the people who impact our lives most profoundly are the ones who show us kindness when they have every reason to be bitter. We want to pay that kindness forward." The report concluded with information about the Foundation's first initiative, a scholarship program for foster youth pursuing engineering degrees, with full tuition, housing, and mentorship support. Marcus's co-worker, a middle-aged woman named Rosa who'd taken him under her wing, noticed his distraction. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Marcus murmured, still staring at the screen where Victoria's face had been. They'd named the foundation after his father. They were helping kids like him, kids who'd aged out of the system with nothing but determination and hope. And they were doing it while he was hiding in Chicago, washing dishes and pretending he didn't miss them with every breath he took. That night, Marcus called the only number he'd memorized besides Victoria's, Riverside Diner. "Giuseppe's, we're closed," came the familiar voice. "Giuseppe, it's Marcus." There was a pause, then, "Marcus. Madonna mia, where are you? Your family, they've been worried sick. I saw the news about the foundation. Giuseppe, what they're doing is beautiful, yes? But not as beautiful as having their boy come home." Giuseppe's voice gentled. "Marcus, you want to know something? Every day, your grandmother, she comes here and sits in that same booth where you helped them that first night. She orders coffee and cannoli and tells me stories about her grandson who's going to be an engineer someday." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "She still believes that? Even after I left? Especially after you left. She says running away takes courage too, when you're trying to protect the people you love. But she also says the bravest thing would be coming home and letting your family love you properly." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching snow fall past the window of his tiny Chicago apartment. "Giuseppe, do you think they'd forgive me? For leaving the way I did?" Giuseppe's laugh was warm and rich. "Boy, they never stopped loving you long enough to need forgiveness. That family of yours, they understand that sometimes people need to find their own way home." 3 days later, Marcus stood outside Riverside Diner with a dozen white roses and a heart full of apologies. Through the window, he could see them, Victoria at her laptop, Harold reading a newspaper, Eleanor knitting something that looked suspiciously like a scarf in his favorite color. They looked older than they had a month ago, worn down by worry and grief. But they were together, and they were waiting. Marcus took a deep breath and pushed open the door, the familiar chime announcing his arrival. 3 heads turned toward him in perfect synchronization, and the expressions that crossed their faces, relief, joy, love so profound it took his breath away, told him everything he needed to know about forgiveness and family and coming home. "Marcus." Eleanor was the first to speak, rising from her seat with tears already streaming down her face. "My beautiful boy. You came home." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm so sorry for leaving, for hurting you, for being too proud and too scared to accept the love you were offering. I thought I needed to earn my place in this family, but Giuseppe helped me understand, you don't earn love. You just accept it, and give it back, and trust that it's real." Victoria reached him first, pulling him into a hug that felt like sanctuary. "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered fiercely. "You're home. That's all that matters." Harold approached more slowly, his recovery still limiting his mobility, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Son, I want you to know something. The foundation, the scholarship programs, we didn't create those because you left. We created them because you came into our lives and showed us what was possible when someone believes in a young person's potential." Eleanor joined the group hug, her small frame somehow encompassing all of them. "The work we're doing now, it's not charity, Marcus. It's legacy. Your father's legacy, carried forward by his son." Giuseppe appeared with coffee and pastries, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Welcome home, Marcus. Your table has been waiting." As they settled into the booth where it had all begun, Marcus looked around at the faces of his family, chosen and blood, complicated and perfect, wounded and healing. "I want to accept the university sponsorship," he said quietly. "But I want to do it right this time. I want to understand that accepting help doesn't make me weak, it makes me part of something bigger than myself." Victoria nodded. "Spring semester starts in 3 weeks. We'll get your paperwork submitted, find you campus housing." "Actually," Marcus interrupted, I was hoping I could live at home. With family. If that's okay. Eleanor beamed. Your room has been ready since the day you left. Harold reached across the table and took Marcus's hand. There's one more thing, son. We've been thinking about the foundation, about the scholarship program, and we want you to be involved. Not as a beneficiary, but as a partner. Who better to design support systems for aging out foster youth than someone who's lived that experience? Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with purpose. I'd like that, he said. I'd like to help other kids find what I found: family, opportunity, hope. As evening fell over the diner where 3 generations of Ashfords had found each other again, Marcus understood that his story wasn't unusual because it was miraculous. It was miraculous because it was simple: kindness recognized, love offered and accepted, family defined not by blood alone but by the choice to care for each other despite differences and difficulties and the inevitable complications that came with being human. 2 years later, Marcus David Ashford stood at the podium of his university's engineering graduation ceremony, valedictorian of his class and the youngest person ever to receive the school's humanitarian award. In the audience, Victoria, Harold, and Eleanor beamed with pride that had been earned not through obligation but through the daily choice to believe in each other's potential. The David Marcus Ashford Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, providing support for hundreds of young people transitioning out of foster care. Marcus had designed many of the programs himself, using his engineering training to create systems that worked and his personal experience to ensure they addressed real needs rather than theoretical problems. But the moment that mattered most came after the ceremony, when a young woman approached him outside the auditorium. Mr. Ashford? I'm Sarah Chen. I'm starting the foundation program next month, and I just wanted to thank you. I aged out of foster care last year, and I thought college was impossible until I heard about the scholarship. Marcus smiled, seeing himself at 18 in her hopeful but guarded expression. Sarah, the only thanks I need is for you to succeed and then help the next person who needs a chance. That's how family works: we take care of each other. As Sarah walked away with information packets and a list of mentors who'd supported her through her first year, Marcus felt his father's presence as clearly as if David had been standing beside him. The circle was complete, the legacy continued, and love had indeed found a way to overcome everything, even death, even time, even the fear that we might not be worthy of the good things that come to us. Marcus David Ashford was home, and home was wherever his family chose to build it together. I know you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Kindly share your thoughts in the comments section below and share this video to family and friends. The end.